what are some of those big mistakes that you want to avoid?
I would say contacting or contracting with vendors before you have a date and location. Besides, obviously, those first two we talked about, full service planner or venue. You don't want to book your photographer before you know like how many. If they're available. Right. Also, if your venue has restrictions, maybe you think like, oh yeah, I'm going to get married at this church and then I'm going to go over here to my reception. I'm going to do my service at the church at 5:30. And then you book your photographer thinking you only need 8 hours. And then the church is like, oh, no. We only offer a 2:00 ceremony,
right? Which
happens a lot with Catholic ceremonies. And now you've booked your photographer for 8 hours, but you really need them for like 10 or 11 hours.
Right.
So now you're having to pay, all these extra fees, which is fine. And like, that's totally okay, and I'm sure your photographer has an hourly rate, but
of course.
Wouldn't you rather know that up front? So I think that's just a mistake to avoid. Also, on the other side, waiting too long and then not having, the vendors you want to have availability.
Right.
So there's definitely like a sweet spot of kind of booking each of these vendors. And we'll make sure to add some of that information too. So you can go check out the site and get some of that.
I mean, you're already going to have to like juggle dates anyways, because, your close friends and family are going to have their own commitments already. So juggling, I remember when we were going through our wedding, like that was a juggle.
Yeah. I feel like the date thing is just like, it'd be great if you could do multiples,
it's actually one of the hardest things.
It is. Yeah, for sure.
Okay. So what are some other mistakes that you can avoid?
As far as I think trying to book too many vendors at once and just having like a ton of contracts and getting careless, not paying attention to details, making sure that everything that you've talked about is in those contracts. You've booked the right packages, the right number of hours.
Read your contracts.
Everything's in there. You've accounted for, whatever kind of special things are in the contract with each vendor, and that those things and you've made note of them in your timeline or checklist or wherever you're keeping these things. Another big mistake we see is like locking into a minimum without any kind of estimated guest count. I think this happens specifically a lot with beauty, where you're like, oh yeah, I'm sure all my bridesmaids will want to do hair and makeup. And then maybe you're asking them to pay for it. And they're like, oh, no, I don't want to do that.
I already had to fly in, buy a dress.
Right, I don't have the money for that.
Yep.
And now you've locked into, maybe 10 service minimum and you only have 8 bridesmaids, and now you're scrambling to fill those or having to pay for it for your bridesmaids or whatever.
Yeah.
With catering too, I think it happens less frequently that you're locking into a minimum because typically the minimums are smaller than wedding guest count. But catering too, I mean, make sure when you get an estimate, you find out like, is this an estimate? Is this a minimum number? What is the minimum number I have to hit? And make sure you know that up front before you kind of get too far down the line. And then as always, not setting a budget first.
Right.
We've talked a few times about budget. You have to have a budget before you book any vendors,
right.
any vendor at all. Your full service planner can help you build that budget. So you can definitely book a full service planner before you have like a real kind of budget in place. But I would have an idea of what your budget is, so you don't have a $15,000 budget and then you're spending $5,000 on a planner, and now you have unless that planner is not coming out of budget, which happens a lot. So that's something to keep in mind. I definitely wouldn't book a venue until you have an idea of budget.
Right.
You don't want to spend 75% on food, beverage, and venue and then have nothing left for anything else.
Right. Yeah, it makes sense.